All right, everyone, the red light is on and we are recording. Welcome back to another episode of the Weekly SITREP. I'm Mark and I run the veteran professional website, and my co-host here is Kyle, who runs SITREPs to Steercos, probably the most popular mill meme page on the internet. I think we're all going
I wouldn't go that far, but
to.
is it even really a mill meme page either? I feel like it's more than that.
Oh yeah, you've definitely morphed into a lot of different realms. So
Yeah,
we won't call it just that, but it's a piece of there for sure.
yeah.
Um, All right, everyone. So we're recording this on February the 6th, and the episode will be released on February the 8th. So what Kyle and I do is every week we get together and we talk about what are the big events from the business and politics world in the past week. And the whole point of it is to give you some information, give you some insight. You know, Kyle's been out in industry for a couple of years now. I'm a first year at Darden Business School. Um, just kind of give you our perspectives so that if you're someone who's contemplating life outside of the military, you can feel more comfortable about, when you hear, when you're hearing terms or things in the news that you kind of know what's going on. You can take that with you into an interview for school or for a job, and also just feel generally more comfortable about stepping in the civilian world and like knowing what the hell is going on and why people care about XYZ thing, which maybe you didn't really care about when you're in the military. Okay. But to start every episode off, we always go to the mission brief. All right, and this is where we talk about just some general military defense related news that this community probably cares about. So the first thing I wanted to bring up, so the Biden administration, is doing all kinds of things, as they get settled into office right now. One of which is saying that they're going to halt support for offensive military operations inside Yemen. Okay, now most people probably don't even like know what military offensive operations inside Yemen looks like. My last deployment was actually to Saudi Arabia, and so we were supporting the Saudi government um, in a variety of capacities. But this is one of those things I wanted to bring up because it shows the like various ways in which the U.S. military is on these like fringe things that most people don't even really know about. Now, I think like the main impetus behind this policy push is there's been some serious humanitarian concerns about the Saudis' involvement inside Yemen. Lots of civilian casualties with strikes. There's been like widespread famine, all kinds of terrible things have been going on. And the U.S. name, our brand, has been associated with the Saudi war inside Yemen. Now, from the Saudis' perspective, um, the Houthis, which is the rebel group inside Yemen, with direct support from Iran, is launching attacks into Saudi Arabia. They're sending in armed drones towards civilian infrastructure and businesses, and I believe something actually even landed in Riyadh in the last month or so, fairly recently. But they've sent some cruise missiles and armed drones towards Saudi population centers from inside Yemen. Okay. Now, Kyle, do you have any like immediate thoughts, interests, concerns, and like what's going on with this?
Yeah, I think this has always been a sore spot for a lot of people, and Congress has not been a big fan of the executive branch's support for
Right.
the war in Saudi Arabia's war against Yemen, right, which has caused a lot of pain and suffering in civilian populations. And when you listen to now former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo talk about it, I mean, the reasonings behind it are somewhat, they're valid in a kind of cold and calculating sense, which is
Right.
Saudi Arabia, is a U.S. ally. They have been for a long time. They have support against. They're helping support. They're a stable. They're not a democracy, obviously, but they're a stable government in the Middle
Right.
East who are
Right.
we do a lot of business with, and they also are have been critical to trying to pursue broader peace initiatives in the Middle East, and also act as a bulwark against Iran and its
Right.
ambitions as well.
Right.
And so it's kind of like, this is almost kind of like, hey, the Trump administration turned a blind eye to it and said, we understand that, this is probably not the most kosher, and it's the wrong word. This isn't the most this isn't the best thing to be doing, but
Right.
it's in its strategic calculus, it's one that made sense to them. But clearly, the Biden administration is deciding to take a different tact, right? And probably more in line with less transactional motives here and more aspirational ones. So
Yeah.
it comes out of it.
I think my kind of take on this too is I think some part of the strategy also is tied up in the Biden administration's push. They're like one of his huge priorities is climate change. And so I'm wondering if like this kind of trying to decouple military interests from Saudi Arabia is also associated with trying to, decouple the United States from foreign oil in particular so that we can, create more alternative renewable energy sources somewhere else.
They better not strangle fracking in the U.S. then, because
Yeah. A multi-pronged approach here. We'll see how it turns out. But yeah, for all the reasons Kyle talked about, Saudi Arabia it is an ally. They're also very, their geographic location, the Strait of Hormuz is on their eastern coast, where about 25% of the world's oil goes through. They have the Red Sea on the west coast, which connects Europe to Asian markets. So it's like a very important body of water. Additionally, I mean, they're the largest country by land mass in the Middle East, and they're also the site of the most holy sites in Islam, and like they're the seat of Sunni power, with Iran being like really the place for Shia. So for all of those reasons, we have long stood by Saudi Arabia. I don't see that going away anytime soon, but I think we're looking for some type of restructuring of the relationship.
Yeah, and I'll add on to this. What's interesting to me personally, right, is when I was in my MBA program, I had the chance to go to Israel, and with a bunch of other MBA students, and it's called this trek, right, which is put on by the Israeli government to basically take people from law programs, business programs, right, who they view would be it'd be useful to say educate those folks or give them a positive view of Israel, because they'll probably go on and be somewhat successful and have some voice or money to throw around at some point.
Right.
And I think for a lot of vets, right, if they they go on a deployment, right, they may see certain things, but when and depending on what sort of part of the military you're in or what your job is, you can be like in like a little bubble, when you go on a deployment, right? But it's really interesting going to Israel and like walking around the old city and seeing, okay, like I understand now why this is such a big deal, why this part of the world is such a problem, right? Because you have all these people who, these religions that, don't really get along, even if they're, they have a lot of historical roots together, and they're right on top of each other. And they all have very, very strong opinions about what, about what these different sites should be and traditions and everything. And it was really eye-opening. I would encourage, everybody, if you have the chance to participate in some of those broadening experiences, right? Even if they're at a surface layer, right? I was there for like 2 weeks, right? It wasn't like a
right.
like a super deep thing, but it definitely broadened my perspective on it.
Yeah. I have a former Israeli intelligence officer in my class, and he has lots of thoughts and feelings on these things. It's great.
Yeah, no, it's cool. There are a lot of Israelis in MBA programs, right?
Yeah.
And they it's good, right? We should have more allies in MBA programs.
Yeah, they're super smart. All right, the next piece we wanted to talk about. So this is an article that Kyle sent to me, and it's titled, it was on from military.com, about the top Marine general. We need to get comfortable with throwaway equipment. So Kyle, like, what kind of piqued your interest in bringing this one to the group today?
Yeah, as a former aviation officer, right, military aircraft are highly accounted for, right? They are something of interest to a lot of people, all the way up to the highest ranking flag officers out there. And this idea that the military could get comfortable or should get comfortable with basically saying, hey, if that aircraft isn't going to make it back, who cares, right? Like it is kind of a big mind or paradigm shift, is right, if we were going to use some sort of term for it. And this is a tough shift for the military, right? Because it kind of, like, my equipment is my baby, right? Like like the military almost takes equipment more seriously than it takes people in many ways, right? And the idea that you would have something that you could just throw away and say, hey, we know this advanced piece of technology is great, but they're easy to produce now, so who cares, right? Is a pretty radical shift, but I think it's one that might be necessary, right? Because if you have like autonomous vehicles that are out there doing their thing, right, and one can't make it back, okay, let's not let's just bomb it or destroy it or do something. Let's not like spend an excessive amount of resources trying to recover this thing, and that's a big change for I think would be a big change for a lot of military leaders, and also redefine how they would employ strategy and tactics at the different levels of war. So interesting stuff, and I think just one that's a preview of what's to come, right? Maybe the next 10 to 20, 30 years from now.
Yeah, super interesting stuff. Okay, the last thing we want to talk about here in the this portion of the show. So, former General Austin, now Secretary of Defense Austin, made an announcement about a global force posture review. So essentially, like what he's talking about is he wants us all to, wants the military to review how we are postured for threats all around the globe. Okay. Now, at first glance, this is kind of like, okay, pretty kind of basic Secretary of Defense stuff. But Kyle and I were like digging into this a little bit more during the show, before the show, and this is kind of what I thought on it. So one, I'm a former 82nd guy. I was in 3rd Brigade, 82nd H minus all the way airborne, and General Austin wasn't mine, but he was the 3rd Brigade. 3rd brigade commander at one point, so he's an 82nd guy himself, and just coming from that mentality, like he has a very much a readiness mindset. Like we got to be ready to go anywhere in the world at any point in time. And like, that's just, I think, how he views the world. Now, I mean, his career spans a lot more time than in the Deuce, but that absolutely had like, a instrumental impact in like how he views the world. Additionally, I think all his time in working, in particular, like in CENTCOM as a CENTCOM commander, and like working in Iraq as a commanding officer and everything, he's going to put a lot of emphasis on those alliances and those relationships and those partnerships with our allies and our partners across the globe. And I think the strategy, his kind of like idea to like refocus on this, is a shift from the Trump administration, which was a little more America first. And I think Austin's going to want to take let's leverage our partnerships and our relationships around the world.
Yeah, this is, I think, the polite way of saying we are going to review the past 4 years and make a lot of dramatic changes. Is how I interpreted this, right? Because if you remember, the Trump administration, I mean, it's kind of hard. They did a lot of things, right? So it's kind of tough to keep up with everything. But they dramatically changed force posture around the world. With pulling troops out of certain areas and saying, hey, we want to do something different in Europe. So this is more of a, hey, we're going to review it and probably kind of revert to the mean of what was going on, at least some level before the Trump administration took over. So that's a way to interpret when you see stuff like this. This is the polite way of saying that.
Right. All right, everyone. That wraps up the mission brief. Now we're going to move into the Civvy SITREP. So this is civilian related, mostly business stuff that we're going to talk about this week, and like what you need to know and what you can take away from this. Okay. So the first thing we want to talk about, so Kia is seeking partners to build Apple's car in Georgia. Okay. So Apple is in the process right now of coming out with their own vehicle. I think the current timeline, the current projection is maybe like 10 years from now, something like that.
I actually heard maybe something like 4 or 5 years.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay.
Yeah. But that, who knows?
Yeah. So Kyle, what are your takes on this partnership right now?
So when you see something like this, right, there's a few macro factors that are contributing to Apple having this sort of interest. One is slowing sales. So Apple knows the smartphone market at some level has reached a level of saturation, right? If you view the latest iterations of iPhones, they're not revolutionary. They're cool. Like if you made an upgrade from one that was like 4 or 5 years old to the one now, it's a pretty big leap. But these phones where there are these massive like leaps each year, that's starting to slow down. That's just the technology is becoming more mature.
Right.
It's becoming, it gets tough to convince people to buy a $1,500, $1,300 new computer every year. I mean, I could probably get a new phone. Mine's a year old. It works fine for me, minus the speaker. I have to use my AirPods all the time. But
yeah,
people don't want to keep buying these phones, right? Or they don't want to keep, they'll probably upgrade like every like 3 years, right?
Right.
And so Apple is viewing the smart car as I don't know what the hell they're going to call it, but they're the Apple car as is probably the next, major market to break into. And they and so that's one reason they're doing this, right? They're also doing it because they can kind of see the future, right? They see electric vehicles have reached an inflection point. They're becoming, more of the automakers are getting into it. And what I've told people, because I have a Tesla, that the like the cheapest one, by the way. Don't think I'm driving like an $80,000 car around. I wish. But what I've told people is like, it's like driving a giant iPhone, right? Because it's just it's a battery. It's a huge battery with like a touch screen, right? And and it's it's a badass huge battery. But Apple thinks that, hey, there's probably a lot of synergies here, given our given all of our past experience in building this sort of technology, right? So they probably think, hey, this would be the next area where we could really break in, take advantage of the whole kind of the green proliferation,
Right.
and they also, this is another way to keep people locked into Apple's ecosystem, right? Because what I've heard about this is like, just like your phone, the watch, the MacBook I'm talking to you on right now is all in a giant ecosystem. Like if I open up my MacBook, right, my watch unlocks the MacBook. I don't have to put in my password. So imagine like you have like your Apple Watch here. You like just go to open your car and you get in like it's going to be like that, right? And so that is, Apple views this as a way to continue to pull people into their ecosystem. But it'll be interesting. Kia, not who I would have picked.
Yeah. Little surprising there. I would not have, like, the Kia brand and the Apple brand just don't like resonate with me together in a way that feels natural. But Apple's super smart, and I'm sure they're going to find a way to make it happen. And given that Cook is the former COO of Apple, I'm sure he's gonna have a very like operational focus on moving forward with the iCar or the Apple Car or whatever the hell they're going to call it.
Yeah. Well, I think the one consolation that I have is by the time they actually start rolling these things out, I'll have had my Tesla for like 4 or 5 years by then. So
Right.
I won't feel like I just bought this thing and now there's an Apple car. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But it'll be cool to see. I've heard it's supposed to be autonomous at some level, which I mean, who knows, right? So.
Right. Actually, so Kyle, I'm actually going to skip ahead on our list here a little bit and move right to the Tesla news, just because I think it kind of fits nicely in with what we're talking about right now. So you didn't see Tesla had to recall 130,000 cars this past week. Okay. So what it was really focused on was their touchscreen. And so Kyle and I were talking before the show, and my initial thought, so from Tesla's perspective, the regulators were saying that the vehicle had to be recalled because the touchscreen, certain components on it, seems to kind of wear out after 5 to 6 years or something. All right. Tesla's argument is that, okay, it's just not really economically viable for us to like build these things and to make every part on a car last for 5 to 6 years. Like there's just some things you're going to have to replace or fix or whatever. Okay. So Kyle and I were talking, and he was like, "Yeah, but like that touchscreen like runs the car. Like that's how you do everything." And so I think Tesla is not really going to throw a huge fit about this. One, I don't think that's really like the norm in the industry for car makers. And then additionally, like they're so focused on providing a good user experience for their customers that like, okay, they're like, okay, we can like spin this in a way that makes it look like we're just trying to make better cars for you all by bringing these things back and fixing what's going on. So Kyle, as a Tesla owner, what's your thoughts? What's going on here?
Well, for one thing, these are older vehicles, right? The S and
Right,
X's
right.
were some of the first ones to come out, and so this isn't like the new ones, but it does speak to something, right? If you've never actually ridden a Tesla, the car is controlled entirely by a touchscreen, right? It's like you have like a giant iPad in it, and there is no like speedometer, there is no like RPM indicator. Like I mean, you have like a a numeric like speedometer, right, in the touchscreen and everything. But yeah, if you were to lose that, if that were to go out, that would I would I don't know how I would drive the car. But Tesla also has like they're basically making uh, they're basically making the argument that hey, we can replace this with a new piece of memory or an upgraded touchscreen. And so they're making the argument that like, hey, you're saying that we have to do this recall, but we're telling you is your idea of how a car is made and what a car is and when those things would trigger a recall are outdated because you don't because we're so far ahead of you in terms of government regulation, right?
Right.
And I think what's the quote here? NHTCA's anachronistic regulations are unfit for situations where there is no safety defect, but neither lets the manufacturer immediately can improve vehicle performance, including safety performance, without the cumbersome need for physical repair. This is actually pretty consistent with Tesla's giant middle finger that it throws to people, or Elon Musk as well, but they kind of treat government regulators as being dumb. So I don't know. It'll be it'll be interesting, but uh, these are older cars, right? And
Right.
so I don't know. But the one thing is note, and you think like 130,000 cars, Tesla only last year was able to meet its met its delivery goal of 500,000 cars, right? So when you think about the universe of Teslas out there, it is like a sizable chunk, right?
Absolutely.
So interesting, right? But also interesting that in the sense of government regulation, the manufacturer is saying, you guys are just not keeping up with how quickly technology is changing.
All right. All right. The next piece we wanted to talk about. So we already talked about the new administration, the new presidential administration's kind of refocus on the global stage for defense and readiness and everything. Next, we want to talk a bit about like what's going on the home front here. Okay. So there's a variety of like economic things going on. I'm sure everyone's kind of keeping abreast of the stimulus package that the administration is trying to push through. But one of the things we want to talk about was this article that we're looking at. The Biden administration's elusive stimulus goal, full employment. So we want to talk about like kind of like the economic theory behind full employment and like what that means and why, the words full employment sound really good, right? You hear full employment, you're like, great, everyone has a job. Everyone who wants a job has a job. Jobs are great, awesome, cool. Well, there can actually be like a little bit of a downside having full employment. Okay. In the world of like economic theory, perfect full employment is like the great white buffalo, then you're like never really going to achieve. And the reason you kind of like almost don't want full employment is if no one is unemployed, then the people who are employed can now demand higher wages. And if they demand higher wages, then their employers now have to raise prices to pay for those higher wages. So then you as the consumer now have to pay higher prices to pay for the employees' higher wages. And what that leads to is just inflation. Okay. So Kyle, what are your thoughts on
Yeah,
this? And is there anything else you want to share?
yeah. I think also a way to view full employment is you always need to have some percentage of unemployment, right?
Yeah.
And the reason for that is people have to be searching for work, right? Or there's
Right.
like a mix of people who aren't in the labor force for a variety of reasons. When I worked at my last consulting firm, they used utilization as well. And utilization is almost like the employment number, right? And you always had to have a percentage of people that were not currently on projects, right? Because you had to have a bench to pull from when new work would come up. And so that's one reason in economic policy why you would not want to have like an unemployment rate of 0%, right? But the idea is that unemployment rate it becomes very small or becomes smaller. Then there's the idea that there's going to be an increase in wages, right? Because then there's pressure, right, where they're having companies are now having to compete for employees might have like multiple job offers. The last people really criticize the Trump administration for a variety of reasons, and but something the Trump and they benefited from the economy that Obama handed them, but the economy really took off underneath the last administration, and you started to see wage gains because the unemployment rate was so low. You start to see wage gains among the lower, the what would be called like the lower end of the economy, right? So less skilled work, people who are entering the labor force for the first time or re-entering the labor force after being out for a while. And that's good, right? Because if you talk about, hey, there's an equality, or there's an inequality gap, right? The inequality gap is going to go more. People will, at the lower end, are going to experience more of the benefits during really tight unemployment. And that might be one reason why you haven't seen inflation, right? Is that the inequality gap was such that, hey, they're just now starting to make some real gains here, right? And if it started to get like to the point where it really got overheated, that might be where you see inflation. But the Fed's always assumed that low unemployment would equal low inflation, or low unemployment would equal high inflation. And the past two economic booms that we've seen have not fed into that, which is one reason why the Fed has kind of shifted away from viewing that, hey, even if unemployment's super low, that doesn't mean we're going to automatically raise interest rates here, because there's no corresponding inflation to match to that.
Right.
Now, the risk is that inflation could fly off the handle at a moment's notice, and you might see that here once the economy fully opens back up, because the employment rate's like 6.7, 6.3%, something like that, and household savings that are an all-time high. And so, when everything opens up and people really start spending all this money they've been saving, that might drive inflation up. So, that's kind of how I would take this article here. But the economics is a tricky thing, right? Even somebody like Janet Yellen has changed her position on what you would think would be pretty foundational bedrock policies multiple times over the course of her career.
Yeah. All right, everyone, you're ready for your Nobel Prize in economics here in the next couple of weeks. All right, the next thing we wanted to talk about. So, the last couple of weeks we've been talking about the craziness of GameStop and AMC and Wall Street bets and like everything that's been going on. So there's obviously a lot of consternation that happened when Robinhood in particular put limits on how much you could trade. Okay. And it became this like battle between the little guy and, the Wall Street barons. Right. And the average investor, the average individual investor was like, what? You can't tell me how much I can and cannot trade. Right. And so it became this thing. Everyone felt like it was, the hedge fund managers that, Robinhood was doing this to like protect the hedge funds and like the whales on Wall Street and everything. And we want to talk a little bit like about why they made this decision, because there's actually some like operational reasons and like how they have to run their business for why they did this. Right. And it wasn't just because they were trying to stick it to the little man or protect the big guys. Okay. So there's a couple things that kind of go into these trades. Right. So first of all, Robinhood has to have a certain percentage of cash on hand to be able to cover people's investments. All right. So just like at a bank, right? So like the way banks make money is like I go and deposit money into the bank, and they give me the terrible pittance that is the current savings rate right now, but then they loan that money back out. Okay. Well, it all comes from like a guarantee that like when I go into the bank and I then say, okay, I want my money, they have to be able to pay me. All right. It's kind of like the same thing with these trading apps. Right? They still have to be able to, actually like move the money around from point A to point B. And so they have to have a certain number on the books. And so like what was happening with, with these internet meme stocks and everything was that they were just kind of getting out of hand. Additionally, too, there's like some huge costs from, from these apps perspectives of, everyone was new people were trying to like rush into Robinhood or whatever it was to start trading these apps and like put in options and whatnot. And every like new account that comes to them costs them money. Okay. Now it's not a whole lot, but it costs them time, effort, and resources to like process these accounts and like put them into the atmosphere and everything. So and kind of like looking at this and like knowing the situation a little bit, like what else is there to consider in, like in these brokerages and like why they would have put some caps onto the trading that was happening.
Yeah. So if you get on Robinhood and, Robinhood has kind of like, Robinhood's big sell, right? If you've never really done anything in the stock market before, is you can trade commission free very quickly, in almost a game type manner. It's almost like you play like Clash of Clans or something, right? Like Robinhood is kind of like the stock market version of that,
right?
And so part of Robinhood, because it wants to grow, it has to make it easy for people to hey, I'm going to download the Robinhood app, and within like 10 minutes I'm going to be trading stocks, right? Even if the cash that they're going to trade those stocks with hasn't settled in their account. So you like think about it like, hey, I set up Robinhood, I set my account, I link my my bank account, and then within 10 minutes I'm gonna be able to trade stocks. Well, you actually haven't put that money into the like money takes much longer to transfer into your bank account from your bank, leave your bank account, actually settle into Robinhood's account than those 10 minutes. So there's a lag between when investors would say like book a new position in stock, like say, hey, I'm going to I'm gonna jump into this stock or do this call option or whatever, and when the cash is actually exchanged for securities, right? So Robinhood is basically trading on credit here, trading on collateral. And so is the Robinhood's a brokerage, right? Like, let's just be clear on what the sort of company is. And so they have to maintain deposit accounts at the clearinghouses that would help finalize these trades. So the main clearinghouse is called the TCC, which is Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation. And it operates the main clearinghouse for most U.S. stock trades. So it requires brokerages to essentially post more of their money in riskier times to insure against losses. And so when you have this huge infusion of investors, investors, I use the term loosely, gamblers, who are now saying, hey, I want to get on this GameStop action, right? So I'm going to join Robinhood. And like, there's all this volatility going up. Like Robinhood, they had, that's why they had to get $3 billion more in collateral to basically be able to front to the depository trust, say like, look, we have the money for all this crazy stock action that's going on, even if, we're going to have to wait like another couple of weeks. Right. And that is a more, that's a much harder argument to understand than saying, hey, the hedge fund guys are screwing us, like that. That's a much harder argument to understand, but it's an argument that's rooted in reality. So, that's probably the way to view, to view this, right? But there's also some other costs as well, right? Like, it's also just not cheap to do this like sort of stuff, right? That's why Robinhood makes money off of order flow. They make some money off of the float from the cash that's held from customers and everything. But people were thinking like, okay, like, is this actually a good idea? Is it a viable business model? Right. Well, it's probably not a viable business model if you have to keep going back, pot in hand, and keep asking, hey, we need more money because our brokerage can't handle the amount of volatility that's being generated by giving stock trading access to people who have no idea how to trade stocks, right? So it'll be interesting to see, like, I don't know, maybe there'll be the return of some level of commission. Maybe they went too far in the free trade thing, and so I don't know. We'll see. I'm sure Robinhood doesn't want to do that because they would much rather they want to lower the barrier to entry as much as possible to get people into the stock market, which is good. You want people to invest money, right? Even people who are young, you just want to do it in a responsible way that isn't gambling.
So one of the funnier things I thought about this whole saga. So I'm an old man, and I actually like get the physical newspaper and I read it. Partly because my apartment has it for free, so I like read the paper version of the Wall Street Journal every day. And Robinhood took out like a full page ad, centerfold in the main portion of the WSJ, and it was all saying like, hey, we're here for the little guy, like we're still like your brokerage, and it was all meant to be this message of like, we're not here to cater to the Wall Street managers and the hedge funds of the world and everything. It was just very interesting to me that they put it in the journal, and they weren't like advertising that on like Reddit or something, right? They put it in like the newspaper that everyone who like works at a hedge fund reads, messaging towards the little individual investor. And I was just like, I looked at this thing, I was like, this doesn't make any, like, why would you guys put this here? But that's what they did.
You think they'd maybe pull like a couple primetime ads and be like, try to explain their position, I don't know. The stuff you see in social media, though, some of this stuff is the same stuff you saw in the election, right? There's like wild conspiracy. Yeah. So the point that I basically said, where was the last part that you heard?
I think you had just said something about Robinhood maybe like taking out some like primetime spots to do like a broader ad, and then like that kind of where it paused.
Yeah, so I'm surprised Robinhood wouldn't, and maybe they will do something like that. I mean, I'm sure they're evaluating their PR campaign here continuously. But something to note, right, is this idea that hedge funds are screwing people over and whatever. This plays into many of the same things you saw during the election, right, with like
Right.
falsehoods and conspiracy theories being promoted about election fraud that have no basis in reality. And it just goes to show how people should really evaluate the news they're getting. And they should also really think very heavily about how quickly misinformation spreads online, right? And, you know, it, it's like, was it like a lie gets, halfway around the world before the truth gets its pants on? It's true, right? And even like they have this huge thing, all these, hey, people, we're going to, the hedge funds are screwing you or whatever. And then like try to like compare that simple message, which resonates with a lot of people is, hey, you like the deposit trust and clearinghouse, like that's a much harder thing to explain. But
Totally.
it's one that is actually the truth. So
Yeah.
it's tough for companies to have to explain that in a way that makes sense to consumers.
Yeah. Okay. This may be the last time we bring up GameStop, everyone. I don't know, but we'll see. Stay tuned in the future.
I feel like GameStop has run its course.
I feel like it's run its course.
It was like it was trading at what, like 60, and it's it's probably going to trade lower here at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Anyway, so the next story that we want to move into, so Jeff Bezos, absolute like gazillionaire, has more money probably than God himself, has stepped down from the role of CEO of Amazon. So we kind of talk about like a couple of reasons like why we think he might want to do this. So Bezos is kind of famously a little elusive and like a little secretive, so no one totally knows kind of everything that he does. So like my takes on this are a couple things. One, I think Bezos kind of has this like crazy world villain almost aspect to him, and I think he wants to separate himself from Amazon because of that. And stepping out of the company like in the role of like the CEO position allows the brand to grow without necessarily being attached as much to Jeff Bezos. Okay. Additionally, I think there's some things like I think he wants to refocus on some other businesses that he's involved in. Um, SpaceX has been doing really well, and I think he wants to see Blue Origin, his space company, also, pun intended, take off. And so I think he wants to work with them a little bit more as well. Okay.
He's also his ex-wife, right, who became one of the richest women on the planet when they got divorced, right? And he just cut her a check. He was like, just take it.
Yeah,
like he was super general, so great return on capital there for her. She's actually been giving away most of the money, right? And so I've heard that he doesn't want her philanthropic efforts to overshadow his right. So he does have other interests, right? When you make that kind of money, you start to really do think about your legacy because you start to have like a government level impact on people. And so he's thinking about like, what is the Bezos legacy going to be, right? Clearly everybody's going to associate with him with Amazon, but what if he could do something like Bill Gates, like that's what he wants to do. I personally kind of think it's that scene from Prometheus, right, where they have that super rich guy that's bankrolling the expedition to that planet and in the search for eternal life, but the aliens end up killing him anyway. But maybe that'll be Jeff Bezos, right? Trying to find ways to search for eternal life. That's a joke, right? I clearly don't believe it. But yeah, it is interesting to see him stepping down and handing the reins over to Andy Jassy, who ran the cloud business with Amazon Web Services, which is really the main cash cow for Amazon.
Right. Yeah, we've talked about that before in the show. I think like as the common layperson, your perception and your interaction with Amazon is just from their e-commerce brand. Going to Amazon.com to buy new whatever and everything, and going to Prime Video and using your Alexa to order new stuff or ask what the weather is. Like that's what most people's interaction with Amazon is. But their cloud data services of cloud computing and Amazon Web Services, like that's their money maker. Like that's really like what brings it home and like helps them really structure how like a lot of businesses do things. And so I think it's very telling for them to take the, the guy who was running that part of their business and assign him to be the CEO. Like it just shows the priority that they're placing on that aspect of their business model.
Yeah, and and if you read Amazon's financials, right, the AWS business has a lower revenue than the retail business, right? But the retail business has like razor thin margins. One, because it's
Right.
retail,
Right.
which retail consists basically reselling stuff, right? So it has to be high volume and low. It's high volume, low margin. Whereas the AWS business is, you know, very, very high margin, right? And
Right.
and it
Right.
contributes most of the operating income to Amazon's bottom line, and that'll continue to grow in the future. And when you think of like the cloud business, right, you're thinking of, hey, like these websites, right? Like mine and Mark's website probably both sit on AWS at some level. Like there's, I mean, I go through Squarespace, and I don't know who your provider is.
Well, yeah, I use, so WordPress is the structure, but I'm hosted on Bluehost.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I'm sure AWS is involved in there in some capacity, one shape, form, fashion, or the other.
Yeah, so that's why it's such a powerful business, because it really
Right.
does reach everything. And there are competitors, right? Like Microsoft's Azure cloud, that's
Yeah,
a competitor.
Sure. Yeah.
But this is this guy Jassy is going to, it'll be interesting to see what he does with it, right? Because he really
Yeah.
understands the cloud business very well. So I don't know, exciting stuff, but we'll see more Jeff Bezos. Maybe he'll be flying around the earth in his rockets or something, or it'll be interesting to see. But
Right.
he's a smart guy, so, and also somebody who is not evil. So it'll be interesting to see what he tries to do with all his
Yeah.
money and free time.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. The last story we're going to talk about before we get to some NBA discussion here a little bit. So we're looking at this article right now. So Kraft Heinz is in talks right now. So one of their brands in the Kraft Heinz enterprise is Planters. So like, Planters peanuts, the Mr. Peanut guy and everything. So they're looking to sell that for about, and reportedly right now, it's looking at about a $3 billion sell to Hormel, which is another, the immediate thing that comes to mind when I think of Hormel is pepperonis for some reason. I don't know. I know they make lots of other food, but whatever reason, I think of pepperoni. So Kyle, I know you were working in M&A before this. So like, why would a brand like Kraft potentially like want to offload one of their companies to someone else?
Yeah, so there is this idea, right? When you think of M&A, right, one of the things that really attracted me to M&A, mergers and acquisitions, right, is it is a really large driver of corporate strategy at a very high level, because it is very expensive to what we call organically acquire capability, right? And when you think of organically in the business sense, that means to grow it, right? But if you're in the military, think of like standing up a new unit. That's a huge pain in the ass. You got to train it and everything, or you can just buy something, and then you're able to just like immediately get it, and you got to go through the integration portion of getting like everything aligned, which is a huge pain as well. And something that produces a lot of money for a lot of business consultants. But there's also the idea too of, hey, what is for a company's strategy, right? Like its portfolio, like what is the core offering? And a lot of the times it makes sense to divest businesses, right? And these can take a variety of forms, right? You can have like a spin-off. I've worked on spin-offs before, where you're literally going to separate a portion of the company and have it form a new entity and go public. You can just do a divestiture. We're going to, sell a portion of the business, or sell a business that's entirely, like maybe like under like a holding company, right? And there's like all these different businesses. We're just going to divest this portion of the business and sell it, and a competitor is going to take it and incorporate it into their business, or take it private. And we're going to get all this money, and then we can use that money, and then we don't have to deal with the pain. Like maybe our focus is shifted. There's carve outs, right? Where you say, hey, we're just going to carve out a portion of our business. Like maybe we're just going to sell like 10 factories or something, sell them to somebody, right? And I mean, literally think about it, you're carving out a piece of the business. And supposedly this unlocks value, right? Because if you spin off or carve out or divest a company, right, that company is now free from the parent, and all the, kind of stuff that is associated with being tied up into, another organization. And, maybe, it isn't just 2 + 2 = 4 now. You could say, hey, it's going to be, the equation is going to change, right? And this company can create value at some sort of level that's beyond like a 2 + 2, right? Maybe it's like a 2 + 8, where they can create like some sort of value, unlock synergies or potential.
Right.
And Kraft Heinz, they bought Planters, or Planters came to them in an acquisition, right? So it's not even like a brand they originally started with, and so maybe they're, Kraft Heinz is like basically trying to like right size their portfolio and see, hey, we've got all these different brands and stories, right? That'd be like the kind of corporate way to talk about it. So what are we going to do with this, right? How do we like have the focus and where we direct our capital and energy and talent to building the company that we think we should be focused on, right?
Right.
And for them, they're probably looking at Planters and just saying, like, maybe who know, I'd have to look at the financials and see what it contributes overall to Kraft Heinz. But maybe they're saying like, hey, maybe it's underperforming, maybe it doesn't fit with where we see we're going, so they're currently in the middle of a turnaround effort. They've been having some trouble, which sucks, right? I really love Heinz, especially going to school in Pittsburgh, which is
Right.
the home of them.
Right.
But for them, it might make sense to say, hey, let's sell this brand, right? We're gonna get $3 billion. We can take that $3 billion and and then they've done this before, right? They got rid of their cheese business and sold it to Lactalis for $3.2 billion. But hey, they sell this, right, and they can take that $3 billion and maybe they're gonna pour it into some sort of like e-commerce or who knows, right? Something like that.
Right.
And say, hey, we can like then refocus on like what do we view as the way forward for the strategy of our business, right? And so that's why you should think of M&A as a big driver of corporate strategy, because you're able to affect very large organizational, cultural, and business changes, by buying and selling businesses. So very, very, very interesting stuff. And I hope Mr. Peanut will be okay. And I think he will. But beloved Mr. Peanut.
I mean, you can't get rid of the peanut in the top hat and monocle, man. Like that just icon of American culture, you can't get rid of that.
Yeah, no, I mean, Mr. Peanut's where it's at. And yeah, but man, I really do love peanuts. It's good.
Dude,
I really
I
really like the honey ones, right? But
honey roasted peanuts, man.
Yeah,
all about that jam. Yeah,
you got to be careful. My wife is actually a huge, my wife, and I've actually, I'm not trying to, I've noticed women are really like super obsessed with peanut butter, right? Like I love peanut butter, but not like the level my wife does. And, as I'm walking around the house, usually because I sleep pretty soundly, right? She'll get up with the kids in the middle of the night because I've got, a full day job. Not to say she doesn't work very hard at keeping, the kids alive, but right. I will find like peanut butter spoons kind of scattered everywhere because she's been like eating peanut butter, in the middle of the night, right? It's kind of like her snack and everything. So yeah, but I know that's a bit of a side, but
yeah,
peanuts are great.
All right. Okay. So the last thing we want to talk about, this ends the news portion, and we're going to talk a little bit about MBA programs right now. So, Kyle went to Tepper. I'm a current student here at Darden, and we know lots of you are interested about going into an MBA or some type of graduate program after your time in the military. So right now we're looking at Poets and Quants, which is kind of like the go-to resource for MBA information. Obviously, after Kyle and I's websites, they're kind of like third tier, really. But
yeah, really, it's a rag nobody reads. I don't even
nobody reads it. No one really cares about here they are. But they're comparing Wharton and Columbia Business School. Okay, so two absolutely top-notch places. All right. So Kyle, what's kind of your take on like the differences between Wharton and Columbia?
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? Because Wharton and Columbia at face value are two very similar schools, right? And the reason for that is because they're both finance schools, know. And when I've talked to Wharton alum, right, they all say, hey, we're not just a finance school. We put a lot of people into tech, which is true, right? So like, don't at me, like everybody's got an opinion. But if you go to Wharton, you have a very good chance of going to work at Goldman Sachs, right? Same thing with Columbia as well. But it's interesting, this Poets and Quants article, right? Because it really is talking about if you were gauging an offer between Wharton and Columbia, aside from the intrinsics, which would be scholarships, cost, right? What are the other things to consider? And, so they've got like the top 10 reasons to go to Wharton. And like the number one is, hey, you want to work for a financial services firm and want the single best degree to do so. That is true. That is true. And what's interesting about that, right, is Wharton is in Philadelphia while Columbia is in New York. And if you've ever done recruiting for investment banking pre-COVID, a good portion of it involves marching your ass up to New York City and going to different banks and having these coffee chats where you basically pitch yourself to bankers and try to kind of like network your way into an interview. So that's one reason to like think about, hey, why Wharton has a sort of cachet that even though you're not in New York City, you are able to basically leverage it. Right now, you can definitely still go work for Goldman Sachs out of Columbia. Don't get me wrong. It's a much shorter trip, right? But the alumni base and the recruiting that goes on in Wharton is just second to none, right? And you like say, hey, you want to go to Columbia. Why might you want to go to Columbia that's different from Wharton? Well, the big one is, like I just mentioned, location. Okay, you're in New York City. Like New York City is the epicenter of business. Like period. Right. There, like I don't care what other MBA programs tell you, what lies they feed you. Lies isn't the right, whatever, unless it's Stanford. Stanford is the real fucking deal, because where it's out in California and all the VC money that's tied to it.
Right.
But it is so easy to interview if you're in New York City. It is so easy to just explore stuff and to be immersed in what's going on in the business world, because all companies have like major headquarters essentially or a presence in New York City. There's so many what I would define as like MBA jobs, right, in New York City as compared to some of the smaller markets. So it's a reason why you would want to go there. But there's also some other things to consider too. Like Philadelphia is a much easier city to live in than Columbia. It costs way less money. New York City, if you ever talk about like the GI Bill and like, BAH and everything, it's really expensive to live in New York City.
Yeah.
And what's one of the other reasons here? Columbia, right? When you think about it, right, there's also a lot of stuff like investment management, private equity, right, or even some more obscure stuff, which is interesting, right, because you think of Wharton as a finance school, but because Columbia is in New York City, right, it has exposure, because there's a lot of stuff that goes on outside of New York City other than just investment banking, right, like asset management, some of the alternative investing that goes on. I remember I interviewed at MetLife for like some sort of like real estate, like asset management job, and it was like out in New Jersey or something, so like there, like it's just that concentration there. And then there's also, you also got to like gauge like the alumni base and also your lifestyle too. Like your lifestyle between living in New York City and Columbia, or New York City and Philadelphia, are going to be very different. I mean, New York City is an intensely interesting place, and not to say Philadelphia isn't, right? But let's be real,
Yeah. Some of the stuff I've also heard about the two schools. So like for Columbia in particular, because it's in New York City, and New York City is New York City, lots of people who go to Columbia were already living in New York City, right? So like their social circles, their friends and everything are already in that area. And it tends to be kind of like a dispersed student network. Some people have like combated me on this and said otherwise, but I've also like kind of continuously heard that from some people. So the answer is probably somewhere in between. I've had some friends who go to Columbia and like they make very close, good connections, but it's a different experience from a school like mine or yours, where most people are probably traveling to that new location rather than looking to like make new friends, right? Another thing to consider too, what like no one talks about when they're talking about MBA programs is the academics portion and like what actually classes and everything are like. And so like with Columbia, like one of the key parts of their value proposition is you get the opportunity to like do a deep dive into like whatever subject you want to go into, right? It's really a school that's focused on allowing you to like pursue electives you want to do. So for example, right, I'm in my third quarter here at Darden right now. Thus far, I've taken all core classes. I just put in the other day for my electives for next quarter.
Yeah, it's my daughter.
They're popping into the screen here a little bit. Uh, and that's just something to consider, right? So, I know like the people in my class who are recruiting for like investment banking, for example, were having a little bit of frustration because they're on these calls and they're competing with people from Columbia who have been able to do like a number of electives like relevant to investment banking, whereas my classmates have not necessarily been to, right? Each school has a different strategy. What we're all saying is understand like what that difference in academic experience is like, because it doesn't really get talked about enough, and it will shape like how your roadmap appears and like what it's actually going to be like to go to school for you.
Yeah, when I went to Tepper, right? Tepper's obviously not in New York City. It's in Pittsburgh, which is often used as a cheaper location to shoot New York type scenes because of the downtown. A good portion of the Batman movies were filmed there, right? And in fact, when Batman fought Bane on the steps of the New York City Hall or Gotham, that was actually Carnegie Mellon. So plug there for Carnegie Mellon. But something to consider is like Tepper has a really long finance background, right? It's produced a lot of Nobel laureates, right? And people say like, well, how do you like kind of understand finance? Like, how do you have an opinion? It's because I took I had the opportunity to take all these great, finance classes from folks who, from a school that had produced a bunch of Nobel laureates, right? And had been teaching it for a long time. So something to consider too, which is, obviously I think the general rules, you really should go to the MBA program that's going to align most with your career goals and has the best recruiting opportunities, but also something to think about as well with, other programs.
Yeah. I think the last thing I'll say, so I know I've talked to members of the veterans clubs at both of these schools, and both of them have really outstanding veterans clubs. Wherever you go, make sure you reach out to the veterans club to understand like what life is like at that school, understand the intricacies of the application process. And just a quick plug to both of them, because Wharton and CBS both have fantastic veterans clubs, so they'll help you out absolutely. All right.
Yeah, something interesting. I'm looking at the admission stats here. Everything's about where you expect these GMAT ranges, average GPAs, selectivity.
Right.
Interesting for Columbia though is its yield, right, which is basically the number of people who accept offers that are given, is 4 points higher. So something, you should always look at that number as well, because it's a big indicator of how people view the opportunity.
Right. Big time. All right, everyone. This kind of wraps up the show for the week. So before we totally sign off and close out, Kyle, you got any last things you want to say?
So I am going to be, over the next course this week, I'm going to be talking about this program that basically allows folks to do kind of like a mini MBA over the course of 12 weeks, right?
Okay.
And it's this invited MBA, right? And I think it's a great opportunity, right? If you are interested in an MBA, or you want to kind of bolster your finance education, but don't want to really commit to like a full MBA, or you just want to kind of take a step up, put a toe in it, you can check this out. And I'm going to be posting it on my Instagram. But if you apply to it, right, and you reference that you came through me, they're going to give you $1,000 scholarship if they basically admit you, right? Which is over half the cost of the program. It's like $1,800. But it's really interesting, right? It's kind of like HBX Core, but much more like interactive and collaborative. So I'll be talking about it more, but that's my plug for it.
Awesome, man. Sounds cool. And for those of you who are not on video and just listening to us, Kyle's kids have been chatting in the background, or our additional co-host right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's only so much I can do. I mean, you see her running around in the back there.
That's right.
My wife's probably asleep right now, so yeah. Sorry for that, but I can only control so much.
Oh no, it's good. It's all good, man. It's all good. All right, everyone, stay safe, take care, and we'll see you all next week.